recorded.
For training purposes?
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry for the interruption.
Was everybody able to get here? Does anybody need me to go back? Or anybody need any help with this? All right. So again, that's the core tools, learn, instructional cycle 1, designing a standards-driven task, and we're in session 2. And then you also want your syllabus open. And we are right here on week 2. So this is the work that we should have done for this week. Up here, the asynchronous work, the work we do on our own. Has all the links in there for you. All your readings and your student context sheet there for you to download. Okay. So I'll stop sharing my screen.
Candy Craig!
Did anybody find out anything interesting or unexpected about their students on that student context sheet that we did for today?
I think speaking from a 6th grade perspective and being in the same school as the 5th grade, we get a sheet from the 5th grade teachers. They fill it out about every possible aspect of the 5th grade kids coming up that we could fathom, like home issues, life issues, behavior issues, but good stuff too, like their interests and all that stuff. So we've got this 4,000-page sheet filled with information about our kids. Yeah, Candy's laughing because she did it. Yes. And so I think we're in a unique place that we have a lot of access. Plus, we share everything on Google Docs and
and then we delete it.
Oops.
It's been a bad week.
Not a good catch.
I wasn't going to say it. But anyway, we all have access to the information, map test scores, unit 1, 2, 3 assessment data, K-prep data. It's all uploaded in a very easy to read sheet. So I think we've got all that together. The only thing we have an issue with is any kids who are new to our school.
Gotcha.
And even that comes with transfer paperwork and things like that.
We also get that from 4th grade teachers. I used it today when working on the proxy students, the 4th grade teachers ones. We learn a lot. I can't remember my password.
I keep them all on my phone. I can never remember mine either.
That's not it either.
So do we want to do what we did last week? Let's go up to the little blue ellipses, the 3 dots, and just change our names to include. I see Go Forth already did this, and Jessica already did this.
I'm not Candy Craig.
Yeah, that's also why.
And again, I love that you're Candy
Craig. Candy Craig too. The opportunity to change her name to her actual.
We all need more Candy Craigs in our life.
No.
I think there's just one, right? So, okay, perfect. And then Kimba, whenever you're ready.
All right. So, been getting everything kind of set up. You have all your tabs open. We've changed our names a little bit. And as you're thinking about some of these reflections this week and who your students are, I want to connect the work that you've done before with some of our work moving forward. And so I'm going to share my screen so we can look at the syllabus, think about our goals for tonight and what we're going to be targeting. And so if you scroll to it should be page 2 of your syllabus, where we actually see our weekly agenda. So when you think about last week, you were completing those action items in session 1. You were finishing that student context sheet. Several people have requested edit access. The only reason I haven't given edit access to that is because the idea is that you take a copy of this. This is like the master student context sheet. So just make a copy for yourself. If you have bumped up against that, and fill out your student context sheet. Yeah, other thing is, hopefully you had an opportunity to take a look at different tasks in each of these collections to get a feel for what possibilities exist out there, right? Because what we're going to start really getting into is what content are you going to design your module for? What are your goals? And really specifically, what are your focus standards as you're developing your assignment that you're going to teach sometime in November or December. And so our goal for today, our focus, is really on the selection of a focus standard cluster. And so over the course of the next hour, what we'll be doing is thinking a little bit about your students and how you help them succeed, and using that as a frame always when it comes to our students and helping them be successful as we think about our priorities in our curriculum. We're going to read a little bit in session 2 to think about focus standards and how to really use a reading standard to lift the thinking of a task in meaningful ways. And then we're going to model how you use those standards to really drive the language of that assignment prompt or that task. And so that's going to be the biggest chunk of our time, is using a real text, thinking about that text and what standards it lends itself to, and when we use those standards, how we use that to drive the creation of a task. Then after that, we're going to get you set up for what your asynchronous work is. And so we'll show you a few things about how to set up and link your module, because that is the thinking work of session 2. When you go into the rest of this week, you're going to be thinking about what those focus standards actually are going to be for you that make sense for your curriculum, and then you're going to determine those and get those set up. Okay, so that's a little bit about what our focus is tonight, framed in where we've been and where we're going. Okay, any questions about our goals or objectives for this evening? Perfect. So when you think about a student context sheet and anything new or interesting that you found, what I'd like to do is start with a really quick conversation as far as what are some of the opportunities or challenges that you experienced when helping all students meet your goals. And one of the things we was thinking about doing was putting you into those partner breakout groups, but because you talk so much about your students and you know each other so well, I would really like us just to have a conversation right here together about this. So what are some of the challenges or successes that you've had when you really try to meet all students' needs? What do you think?
I think a challenge is going to be time. When you're trying to meet everybody's individual needs, I think a lot of us have a handle on what our kids' needs might be and how we might try to do it, but then there are so many needs, and sometimes they don't pocket themselves well together. So I think that time can be kind of challenging, management.
At our school, we ability group.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
So some people are going to have all of the neediest kids in their classroom at the same time. And so that can sometimes be quite challenging because, for example, our special education classes, there's a regular ed teacher and there's a special education teacher, but then our RTI classes, which are that one tier above, those kids that are in the process of identification, it's just the teacher pretty much by themselves with that group of students. And so our school makes it difficult sometimes to reach all of the warm bodies in our classroom because of the way that we group kids.
That can be an advantage at some point too. I mean, it does help the teacher.
It does.
Figure out how to, what's the word I'm looking for? How to
plan. I mean, it does help with planning.
I was gonna say, yeah, like attacking. How are they going to attack the class? And that sounds horrible.
Right. There's definitely
You know what I mean?
The general need of the class is on the same level.
Right.
Yeah, the level. But then I know what you're saying with the neediest kids, because you've got the behavior kids, and then you have the, whatever. But yeah, that's definitely
When it comes to writing, just trying to sit down and conference, like I last year I conferenced on every writing piece with every student, and it would take days, a week sometime to get through conferencing with all of my kids because of how long those conferences took with each of my students, because just because of their need level. So, I mean, yes, it's a positive and it's a negative. But I was making my comment based on the time aspect, Candy, that, sometimes it's really hard to do things in a timely manner when it comes to writing if you're trying to do that one-on-one feedback.
Right.
And I also think that a real challenge that exists in ability groups is, especially in some of the lower groups, that they don't have another voice pushing them into other thinking. It becomes harder to get them into more critical levels without it feeling like it's very teacher guided, where it's not generated from the students, unless you really work hard in that planning to frame the questions in a way or give them meaningful access points so they can get to that deeper thinking, since they don't have peers necessarily pushing them as readily as when you have mixed ability groups, where you have that get it right away, that can push those other students to think about things in different and diverse ways. And so it really is important to find out what your strengths are, so you can start from that as an access point in some ways to get them to that deeper thinking more quickly, without it feeling like it's such a pull from the teacher's end, right? Because the students have those strengths, but maybe they're not used to it in this context, right? And how do we have them apply their critical thinking abilities from other areas into that academic environment? How about some other strength opportunities or challenges when you're thinking about meeting the needs of all students? So we have time, we have, creating access points, the reality of, ability grouping and the structure within your school that has strengths and challenges inherent in it. What are any other areas that are strengths or challenges for you?
Well, I feel like this is kind of going off of what people have already said about like ability grouping, and then Katie Decker, that was weird, Decker talking about like the conferencing and things like that. I feel like sometimes, especially when you have those needier kids or the kids who are more behind, that it can be hard to, we feel like we have to get them on all the same level, and we feel like we have to get on them about every little thing when it comes to their writing. And so trying to pull back and see bigger picture, and really hone in on certain writing skills rather than every little nitpicky thing, I think can be hard as an educator, because we want to help our kids be the best that they can be. But the reality of it is there isn't time. They are so far behind, and we need to start where they are.
What about any socio-emotional issues?
Most of those are also grouped together in our school.
That's so funny you say that, because I feel like sometimes my gifted students have the most issues.
Yes. Well, I don't say the most, but they have their own. They do. I've got a group this year too, and I'm thinking, what is going on? They, the behavior definitely gets in the way. You've got behavior that stops the learning and stops the teaching and slows everything down a little bit. And so, like, just trying to get them to understand the norms of society in a classroom. Does that make sense? Like, just you hit somebody, can you say excuse me? Or things like that. I know that sounds stupid, but it seems like those little things that we take for granted that they would come into school knowing seem to get in the way a lot too.
Well, and I think, in addition to that, the reality, regardless of whether we ability group or not, the reality is the population that we serve, the majority of our students are dealing with childhood trauma, but they don't know how. And I think that is very difficult for a lot of them, and it affects them everywhere that they are and everything that they're doing.
Did anybody put down any traumas that they learned about onto their sheet? I think that's
yeah.
such a
Oh
good
my God. Yeah. There's physical abuse, there's sexual abuse, there's drugs in the household. I mean, we've got kids who've been through things that I know would take an adult down.
Parents have passed away. Like I found out
Yeah.
today about one of my kids who's their mom died like 3 years ago. They're dealing with all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, divorce, everything. But I think, and don't take this the wrong way, social studies is, nobody listening, less important in our school. And you social studies people know.
In 6th grade.
In 6th grade, I
in 6th
know.
grade.
But that gives me.
Grade science is less important.
Truth. It's not as important in the 6th grade either because it's not tested. It's not
Sorry,
tested. So it gives me a unique ability to, like, we write a Friday letter. That's what I was looking at when you guys come in. And they can write to somebody that they love, and they write about their week, and they can tell me if they want. I said, you can write it to whoever you want, but I'm going to read it, and I'm going to make comments on it, and that kind of stuff. And you find out so much stuff that you don't have time to sit and listen to all their stories, but I still want to know. And so this kid, I picked hers out because she's hilarious. It's been another week in this learning cell, but my week has been okay, to say the least. The voice that they have really comes through, and I'm in a unique place. Like I can't, like Toller, she's not in the same space as me. She teaches 2 math classes and a science class. Estes teaches, right, Estes? Yeah, 2 ELA and a social studies. So I'm only social studies. And Estes is kind of like one of my partners in 6th grade. I don't think she has the same amount of time that I do to really get to know a lot of the things that are going on in their life, because hers is at the very end of the day. That class is always cut short by announcements and whatnot. And so it's a cool thing that they tell me through their writing. Estes, weigh in?
Yeah, and that's,
Well, I do.
go ahead.
Well, with my ELA classes, I do high lows as well. So like on Monday, they tell me the highs and the lows from their weekend. So
That's
that
good.
helps. But I don't do that with my social studies class, but I do the Friday letter
Right.
with them. And I do quick writes. And sometimes, like today, it was if you could be on a TV show, which one would it be and why? And so you get to learn little things like that.
Going back, I'm sorry.
No.
Go ahead. Those are some awesome strategies. Go ahead.
What Julie was saying with the kids that are going through, well, what everybody's saying about the kids going through these traumas and things like that, I think the biggest impact with that is that they don't see what we're doing as important because it's not to them. They're focused on so much bigger issues that are life issues. So I think that could be another challenge that we face with our kids is how do we make what we're doing important to them when they're dealing with all these other things outside of the home or outside the school, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Whoops, sorry, I hit my phone. I think that's really important because that's the frame that surrounds all of our work across this whole project, right? Is when we think about who our students are, what their needs are, both academically, emotionally, what their strengths are, academically, emotionally, interest-wise, life, culture, context, all of these things. How do we use that to make the learning that we want them to engage in relevant, meaningful, and interesting, right? Because if they do have, and I would say it's true in almost every district in the United States, truly, our kids have a lot of trauma that they experience in their life because there's just a lot of traumatic happening in our communities right now, right? They to the world with them, and how do we help them access the academic thinking that we want, access the critical thinking that we want, and to learn and be able to apply that to their lives. And so we always have to have that frame there so we can find those entrance points, right? Maybe that entrance point is a strength or an interest. Maybe it's about making it really relevant and real world based, authentic, right? That word comes up a lot in education. And but how do we do that in a meaningful way for our students at this time in this classroom for these goals, right? And really getting it centered in that way. And so I'm actually going to use that as a transition to go into session 2 but I really want you to hear each other's strategies. I heard some great things as far as this Friday letter, a quick check-in at the beginning of class of a high and a low from the weekend, or some of these other tricks that you can use to get to know your students, because time is always an issue, right? And we don't have time necessarily to have individual one-on-one conversations with them as much as we wish we could. So how do we do it in ways that work with our content, with our time, and our structure of our class? So earlier, Sarah asked everybody to go ahead and open session 2 and model the pathway to get there. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen to session 2 to show you where I'd like you to go, because we're going to pause for a minute and do a little reading and then talk about what we see. So here's our syllabus. On your syllabus, one thing that'll make it a little helpful, if you don't already have in a separate tab open to Instructional Cycle 1, Design a Standards-Driven Task, Session 2, the nice thing is this link right here will take you right there. So if you click that link, it'll open you up right away into Session 2. So having your syllabus open each week is really helpful to be able to use the link we're in the session. So once you're open to Session 2, what I'd like you to do is we're going to think through these different design decisions. I really like star graphic because writing a task, there's a lot of different areas that we consider, and those are our entry points, but they all kind of depend and rest upon each other, right? Maybe you start your design through your focus standards. Maybe it's from a text, maybe it's required text or material that you need to use in your classroom. Maybe there's a certain product you want students to write, kind of like those product maps that we looked at when we were together at the launch days. Or maybe there's a certain level of thinking or a cognitive demand that you're trying to get them towards. And so you might start with a template. Or maybe a disciplinary content aspect or topic that you really want to focus on. Thing is, all of these decisions have equal weight within this process. You may start with the text, but you'll go to standards next. And then when you're thinking about what your template is, it's got to make sense with your standards and the text that you chose. Maybe you change a standard and maybe your text has to change because does your text support the thinking that you want here? So when we do the modeling here in just a little bit, we're going to see how these decision points all work together. But what I'd like to do is start with a little bit of thinking around the focus standard cluster again, how these standards work together. We see this image of the 3-legged stool again, which really kind of resonated with people at the launch days based on some of your takeaways as we were together. But I'd like you to read this section. There's just a couple of paragraphs here, and then click through these slides, okay? As you're reading through this, it should only take you about, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 minutes to kind of read through and think through, and then read this design tip. As you're reading through this, I want you to think about what is one idea that's probably the most important for you in your classroom right now, okay? And then we're going to share out that thinking in a minute. So I'm going to stop sharing so you can see your screen okay. You don't have to feel like you're navigating too many windows. And so if you're having any issues getting to session 2 or getting to that content, let me know. And we'll take a few minutes to read that.
My chair is hurting my back. I'm old. What do you want?
Lay on the floor.
I heard this size and I was like, do I mute her? I don't know. It's kind of funny.
My back is hurting. I'm sorry. I don't sit much.
So I think by now, most of you gotten through most of it. How many of you need like another minute or 2? Hold up if you need 1 minute, 2 minutes, or 0 minutes to finish going through this. 0, 1, 1 to 0, 0, 0, 1. Okay, we'll give
binary.
Give about another minute or almost a minute. But I want you to think about what you want to share out. What is the part that's been important to you? And I actually want to hear from the Campbell folks first, because I feel like we've been hearing a lot from Baker.
We're loudmouth MFers, we are.
Well, and I think, Campbell, are you guys all in the same room together? No, you're in different rooms? couple of you are in the same room because I keep seeing you have conversations and like, oh, I want to know what you're sharing. I bet it's really cool about students. All right, so let's hear some of your takeaways. What is the part that seems very important for you in your classroom right now when you're thinking about this and thinking about how you're going to design your task? Let's hear from somebody from Campbell and somebody from Baker.
It's hot in here, and it smells like BO. Not mine.
Stop.
Children. Sorry, I'm done. I'm ready to share, but I mean.
Go for it. Go ahead and share.
No, you need to wait your turn.
I'm waiting my turn. I don't want to run roughshod over anyone.
Campbell folks, let's hear from one of you. You guys are being so shy today.
Okay, I guess I'll go. Just to make sure, we are talking about the raised rigor in a task, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So I guess if I was thinking about how I would apply this to an LDC that I create or a module that I'll create, I liked slide number 7, where it said comparison 4th grade social studies. That's pretty much the whole thing. But it pretty much talks about the impacts and then how it affects their daily lives in their state. And then they have to draw on evidence with specific examples. So they're thinking critically about it, and they're also gaining a deeper comprehension of the material, and then I guess drawing on firsthand accounts. I don't know. I would like but I also like giving them a concrete example. But I'm really big into having them think critically in class and think about using examples from a text or a passage, but then also having them think about, I don't know, themselves in a way. I don't know.
No, thank you. I think that's good. I think that's really important, and how they use the reading standard to do that, right? If you just focus on the content, you wind up with an assignment or thinking level that's here, but you can take that reading standard, right, and use that to really lift it. I think that's super important, because I do think that's what we all want to do. We want to have rigorous tasks. We want to push students into that deep critical thinking, and how do we use our standards to do that in a meaningful way? I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you. How about somebody from Baker?
It's Candy.
I know, I got it.
Sorry.
Big thing flopped up and said I was muted. I like the enduring lessons. Like, there was something on there that said they were going to have to do this later in life. The comparison of the two things. And there was something, I wish I'd written it down. There was something on the slide that said something like it wasn't important. I can't remember what it said. I have to go back and look. But one of the slides said something about how this wasn't as important. And that made me think, like, there's so many times when we do things, we give kids stuff, and it's just not that, it's regurgitation of the information. And there's no point to it, life point to it. You know what I mean? Like, are they going to do this as an adult? Is this going to help them as they get older, kind of thing?
Excellent. That you're back to that relevancy piece, right? And how does it fit into the things that matter? And I think that's what's going to help when you think about that larger frame of students, getting them to want to access and enter into that academic disciplinary thinking, right? Is when you can make it relevant to their life, something that they're going to build on later. And that's also part of what's interesting with the standards, is that when you look at the standards, they're vertically articulated. And so in elementary school, you're laying the foundation for the deeper thinking work that they need to do. And so how do you help really build that in meaningful ways, right? Where they aren't just getting at that recall level, but if they are going to read a text, are they going to read it to do some new thinking with it so that they really push their understandings of things that have value to you in your classroom, right? And so sometimes pairing it with the reading standard is a way to do that, or making sure that your text has enough substance to it, that there's not just one response students are going to give, where you're asked to define something and whoops, there's the definition. I'm just going to grab that and paste it into my writing and now I'm done. What do I really want them to grapple with, right? Or to make connections or draw correlations between and across. And so I think that's really important. I'm going to put a link to a text in the chat that I want us to take a look at and think about how this text could be used in the classroom. It's integrated bus suggestions, and it's from the National Archives. Oh, awesome. Thanks, Sarah, for posting that. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for just a second, but then I'll stop sharing. You can read it on your own screen. But this is a document from November 19th, 1956. It was when Montgomery, Alabama, the bus system was being integrated right after the decision that required desegregation and gave people access to sit anywhere on the bus, right? Made by the Montgomery Improvement Association, which included Dr. King as well as Reverend Powell. And take a minute or two, couple of minutes, kind of skim through this and think about how it could be used in a classroom. And that's what we're going to start by talking about. What do you notice that's unique or interesting about this text and how it might be used? So I'll stop sharing and give you a chance to read.
Okay, somebody's not muted and their dog is barking. It's making my dog bark. So
It was mine. I just muted.
Okay. I was like, my dog's barking at a dog that's online.
I was just about to help Rachel out and mute her, and then she muted herself, and I was like, yes. We've got some ideas from Decker coming into the chat. Keep reading and thinking about how you might use it. What discipline might this lend itself to?
I really like this because we're talking about the civil rights right now. We're reading Lions of Little Rock, which is a book that takes place in the civil rights. And we've actually been talking about like the integration and how it didn't always go well, but sometimes, you could kind of help out with it. So I was looking at like the suggestions. I really like that it talks about like being polite, don't fight back if there is violence, like just don't rise to the occasion, because at the end of our unit, our informational unit, they're going to have to write about a civil rights activist, and one of them is Martin Luther King, and he's all about the nonviolence thing. So I really like this because this could be used as like support for his nonviolence, like actions, I guess.
You could use it to help understand some perspectives in the civil rights era, right?
Yep.
To help you understand strategies and ways of entering into nonviolent protest, which those kinds of things come up in different ways as far as the social studies standards go. You could definitely use it for a social studies class. Because I know that's present in standards depending on the grade level, those two ideas pretty specifically, right? How else might you use it?
So Candy brings up tone, which is, I think, really pretty interesting. What discipline do you think that might relate to?
That would be ELA, as far as, is that what you mean?
Mm-hmm.
like mood and tone, the way they're being spoken to, would definitely fall under ELA. And of course, this would be a primary source for social studies. But yeah, it's pretty wild. Just say a prayer. Make sure you're like, just the time difference is crazy. You know, showing the differences between how, even church and state, you could even talk about separation of church and state and kind of bring that in too if you needed to, but that's not 5th grade. But
I really like number 9, like at the very bottom where it says, if you feel you cannot take it, walk for another week or 2. We have confidence in our people. God bless you. Like, I think that's such a even though I don't know if I feel like that's condescending or if I feel like that's just such a positive outlook on it. Like, it's such an interesting notion that they do say to pray, Candy. And at the end, it's like, you know, if you just can't handle, you know, sitting on the bus with people of mixed color and race, then you just take a walk, honey. You just keep on walking until, you know, you're basically like your heart is ready, till you're ready.
Yeah. Or it just points out, you know, you got another option. If you got a problem with it, you can go do this instead.
I think it's interesting, Decker, how you brought up the condescending tone, possibly. That might be something you could explore with students if you talked about, you know, the point of view and like who was the author of this piece. Was it, you know, was it a white politician? Was it an African-American civil rights leader? Who do we think wrote this, and how did that maybe change the tone? Like, would that make it less condescending or more condescending?
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
There was another thing too. It said, where's that at? There's something in the beginning. It said something about our people or whatever. I'm looking for it.
Prayer several times. Like, the word prayer comes up like 3 or 4 times.
Well, and I think that comes back to audience, right? And point of view. And point of view beyond like first person, second person, third person, but really point of view, what's their perspective from which they're writing, right? That's connected to their purpose in a really interesting and meaningful way, which is important for students to understand in a social studies classroom, right? Because there's a lot about understanding the point of view or perspective of different historical actors to an event, right? That not all people had the same opinion of what was happening at a certain time, or same interpretation of a moment. It's also really important for understanding in ELA, right? Point of view and how that influences the language we use, right? Back to that, the religious language and tone, and how we try to use language to reflect our point of view, or maybe even how we use structure to reflect our point of view. I'm actually gonna share my screen and remind you of something really quick. So if we're thinking about some of these ideas that everybody's been bringing up, which anchor standards, if we were going to read this for social studies or an ELA class or even a different class, what reading standards, when we look at these anchors, might make sense? Now, remember, R1 is something that we'll always do when we're reading, right? It's about pulling that evidence, really grounding our thinking in the text, and it doesn't lift our thinking in the way that some of the others do, thinking back to what you just read in session 2. So if you think about standards 2 through 9, because 10 is really your goal, which of these standards might be an interesting way to read this text and to think about this text from the standpoint of?
Probably number 6. Talking about point of view and the purpose.
Excellent. 6. Are there other standards that might work depending on what your purpose was as a teacher? Decker put interpret and analyze words. That's number 4. I think that came up a lot with that tone, right? And all that religious language and even understanding audience and purpose, which might be, right, number 2, determine central or main ideas, right? Analyze how those are developed. What else is interesting about this text that could be another way of entering into it? Could you read this as an argument? Definitely asking people in the Black community to enter into integrating the buses in a particular manner, right? What about structure? Is there anything interesting about structure in this text?
The fact that it's a bulleted list instead of like in paragraph form or whatever.
Like a letter.
Right, like it's a numbered list. It almost makes it simpler to read. So again, the audience that they may be addressing may not be the most affluent. I don't know. I hate to say that. Like that makes me sound like such a
No. If it's a gigantic paragraph in an email, I don't read the whole thing. I read the first line. If it does not apply to me, I continue on. Has that gotten me in trouble? Yes, today. So, but you get people, you boom, 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 and it leads you through it step by step. And I tell everybody who's going to send me an email, like leave white space. And, do bullets or put different ideas in different sections. It leads you through it. It makes it, I think, easier to understand for yellows and the color code yellows.
I have a question on the text structure. If I'm looking at that, is the first part to anybody else, does it seem like the first paragraph or first two paragraphs and the first 8 geared more towards white people at that time, and then the rest of it's geared toward white and Black? Or am I really not seeing that
I
right?
think it's all geared toward Black people.
Black? No. Well, you think?
Or maybe
No, it's
all
number
geared toward
7,
white.
be quiet but friendly. It's geared at, like, these are the directions that you need to take.
But is it for everybody, or was it set to be?
Well, I think it's for people from a certain side on this. And I would say for the most part, it is probably the Black community, because remember that, look at number 6. Remember that this is not a victory for Negroes alone, but for all Montgomery and the South. Do not boast, do not brag.
Okay.
And I just think number 1, when it starts off that not all white people are opposed to integrated buses. Like
I know twice in the first, I'm sorry, Decker, twice in the first paragraph it said something about our race and then our people. So that's.
So what I hear us doing ourselves, just as we're digging into this text and thinking about it, is really honing in on language, right? R4 seems to be really valuable within this. There's been a lot about perspective and point of view, thinking about audience and purpose. And so a lot of these different standards could come together in meaningful ways, depending on what your purpose is. So if I'm going to use this in a social studies classroom, I'm going to have a social studies content standard, and then to access the content that I want them to about the civil rights movement or about this era or about conflict and competition or something, right? Or if I want to have them try to make connections to modern day, or I don't know, depends on what my content is. Which of those reading standards is going to help students access that? Is it going to be looking at language? Is it going to be looking at structure? Is it going to be looking at point of view? But there's something that's going to help them access this. Now, because the social studies standards change so much across grade level, and they're big and broad and a little bit unwieldy, what I'd like to do is take a minute and pretend we're going to read this for an ELA classroom. Let's say I am a 6th or 7th grade teacher, right? And I want to think about what standard is going to really make sense to use this text. And remember in our reading in session 2, it talked about, as an ELA teacher, you're really taking 2 standards and putting them together. So maybe I'm thinking about how structure is used in a really specific way because their purpose is so important. I want it to be clear. I want them to read it and get to the point right away because my purpose is a matter of life and death, right? Especially at the time of integration, I'd say that's probably pretty true, right? Arguably still today in some circumstances if you want to give really clear directions in heated, controversial areas, right? The other thing is, if I'm thinking about point of view and I really want students to understand point of view and that's my goal, a really great way to access point of view from this text is through language. right? Does language help us really understand point of view in a very interesting and important way? So I'm thinking about how the standards work together and how this text supports the thinking work that I want to do. And so what I can do then is, say I'm here at the LDC site, and I'm going to create a module. I'm just going to make one from blank really quick so I can show you how to think about the way this fits into a task template. It seems to me, based on what a lot of what we were doing as a group, is we really started with analysis. We were all analyzing the text, right? Citing evidence, pulling out all these ideas, and trying to put it together in meaningful ways. So maybe I might start with an analysis template. When I choose a template, I have that edit option, and I just opened it really quick, and I'm here at this template thing, this list. Say I want to start with argumentation or informational writing. I'm not really sure what I want yet, but I can choose by cognitive demand. And so say I choose analysis as my cognitive demand. I can apply that filter, and I'll see just the template for analysis, either argumentation writing analysis or informational explanatory. I think we were explaining a lot of things, so I'm going to start with that and use it. Now, I can go here and add my standards. I'm going to click Edit. And when I click Edit, I'll get my ability to add standards right here. I'm going to click the Add Standards button. Now, I'm using an informational text, so I want to make sure I'm looking at the informational reading standards. And so if I'm an 8th grade teacher,